I'm going to tell you a story. I hope I can remember this story. I've never recited this thing out loud before. He had a real crisp hat, some Stacey Adams kind of shoes. He kind of looked like Miles Davis, real black, kind of blue. He said, you the boy that write them poems? I said, yes, sir, that I do. He said, oh, I seen you. I seen that heaven and hell coming up out of you. It's like you must have seen some things, paid some dues. He said, I was stationed in France back in 1942. I was just 22, fighting for freedom, and I ain't a Jew. You know, when I came home, I couldn't swim in the public swimming pool. He said, man, it's easy to become cynical, easy to become cynical. He said, you know what gets me through? I said, no, sir, not a clue. He said, a precious jewel that I learned back when I was 12 years old from no other than a noble Drew. Back in Chicago, 1932. He said, your whole life is an interlude from what your ancestors put into you and how your descendants depend on you. But through them, you'll live forever and ever. So if you're only into you, that's the end of you. He said, yeah, that's what gets me through. His eyes were a deep brown with a thin rim of indigo. And he opened his eyes. He said, not to get too spiritual, but he put his hand over his head, said, this is the unprecedented, undocumented, crown chakra, Kauthar. Just as the skeptics thought the prophet epileptic, he brought many verses, but one author. While Asr, they've been mocking us since Al-Baqarah and we're still unpopular. He said, I'm no Islamic scholar, but all of the book is in Al-Fatiha, and all of Al-Fatiha in the Basmillah, and all the Basmillah in the Ba, and the Ba is in a dot, like the center of your ocular. And that's a sign for the ponderer. Now look at that. Now realizing that you're looking at that with what you look with, and this is a sign for the ponderer. So if the Ba is in a dot, and a dot in the Ba, in the Basmillah, and a dot in the Ba, in the Basmillah, and Al-Fatiha, then in that little dot is all of the dunya and all of the akhirah. Everything here now and everything after us. In that is a sign for the ponderer. So be a student of your pupil and let the truth school you. Nasru haq bil haq. Okay, so that's a piece of that story, right? So I start off that story talking about his hat. His hat. It's a story about his hat. Only reason I mention the hat because it's on his head. I mention his shoes. It's a story about his shoes. I only mention his shoes because they're on his feet. The only reason I mention his words, because they're coming out of his mouth. But I, as the author, mean to communicate something. So not only is this story a story about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it is a story that has a meaning. And the meaning of this story is love. It is a love story. It is a love story. It is a love story. When Allah says in the Quran, it told the heavens and the earth to come together willingly or unwillingly, He said we come together willingly because that's what lovers do. When the atoms come together, ionic bonds or covalent bonds, why do they do that? Why do you share electrons? Because that's what lovers do. How do we perpetuate existence of our own species except by making love? Because that is what lovers do. We're compelled to it. Everything is compelled to it. Don't you see the sky and the sea making love? Don't you see the heat from the sky drawing the sea up into itself? That is love, because that's what lovers do. Don't you see the sea longing for itself back, pulling itself back down into itself in precipitation? Why? Because that is what lovers do. The entire universe and all the creation is happening because of love. She asked, what does it feel like when a poem comes out? I said, it's like I'm writing my insides out, and I gotta get it out before my pen dries out, before my ego finds out. Can't let my ego find out, because when I'm writing my insides out, my every fear, my every flaw flies out in my ego where those fears and flaws hide out. So whatever I do, can't let my ego find out. But when I'm writing my insides out, if I couldn't write my insides out, I'd probably blow my bloody mind out. Instead, I write and recite to bloom your third eye out. She said, oh, that's what Danger, Dead Man Walking's all about? I said, yeah. She said, well, I'm glad you took the divine route. I said, yes, I took the divine route, but it's only a matter of time before the world finds out this is both heaven and hell coming out of my mouth. And I've yet to learn the secret art of having peace at heart. I took the angst and the anger, make a piece of art, and then I speak it and I share it, and the peace departs to find its home in the warmth of the people's hearts. If I don't have peace with me, how can I have peace with God? It's all or nothing. You can't worship a piece of God. In fact, the piece of God's a facade where the secrets are. You worship God, remember God until you're seeing God. And then you're hearing and you're seeing into being God. And your hands and your feet into being God. The human being. God, only if the human beings knew who the human beings are, my Lord. We know in the Hadith Qudsi, in the 40 hadith, the famous 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, the mentioning, on the law is mentioning the friends of God, and that they don't, the servants of God don't grow closer to him except by doing what is obligatory. And they draw even nearer by doing what is not obligatory, doing the extra good deeds. And then there's a moment that changes everything. It says, until I love him. There is everything up to that, and then until I love him. And what happens is Allah said about himself, when he loves his servant, it's almost so strange you almost can't even utter it. But it's a narration that we all know. He says, I become the ear by which he hears, the eye by which he sees, the hand by what is Allah saying? I don't know what Allah is saying. I'm not even going to try to interpret it. But what I do know is, when Allah loves his servant, something very special happens beyond our capacity to understand, beyond our capacity to really utter, frankly. This is the power of love.